Hello, is this thing on?
Do you think they can hear us?
Nah, let's say it again. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amie.
And my name is Sara.
And we are your podcast hosts.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or any other podcast listening platform, don't forget to subscribe so you can get updates to when we have our latest episodes. Also, don't forget to rate and review us.
And if you like what you're hearing and you love our advocacy work, don't forget to go to www.grittynurse.com and click on the donate button.
As little as $1 or $2 a month for a total of $12 a year will help us with our monthly podcast costs, such as website hosting, our hosting platform,
audio equipment, and the time and energy it takes us to put out good quality episodes. We thank you and we appreciate you. So today we have a very special guest. I am honored to have her on our podcast today. Sara, do you mind going ahead and introducing our guest?
Absolutely. So I think here on the Gritty Nurse podcast, we are really into having experiences and hearing from diverse different people on our podcast. And I'm really excited today because we have someone who actually is a police officer. We haven't had that before. And without further ado, I'm going to let Effie introduce herself and just tell us a little bit about her career path.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show. I wanted to just start off by saying that I am a police officer for Toronto Police. I've been a police officer since 2008. I've been working at the same division downtown Toronto for the entire time that I was hired. And in 2018, I went off sick as a result of just combination of things that were happening over the years of working as a police officer. Before that, I was working in security for Toronto Housing. I was just working towards becoming a police officer. I was volunteering as a big sister with Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Peel and doing various things to prepare me for a career in policing. That's when I was hired in 2008 and I started there.
We just kind of want to know a bit about your story. I know you mentioned that you had gone off. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the events that led up to that incident and sort of what has happened since then?
So I started my career, as I said, in 2008. And from a very early on, when I started police college, I noticed that it was a bit of an overly sexual environment. For example, when we were new recruits, our supervisors would say to the women, make sure to close your legs and don't sleep around at work. You don't want to be a pincushion or metro mattress. But
Wow.
They would tell the guys, two things will get you in trouble: alcohol and women. So, we noticed right away kind of things like that. But it's such a challenging career, especially when you're new. You have to learn so much and there's so many things going on. So, you put your head down and you just carry on, not paying attention to these things. And then as I started my career at 51 Division, 6 months later, that's when I really noticed that the environment is overly hypersexual and just toxic.
Yeah.
And then it just, things, you have like the same officers approaching you, asking you about personal things like, do you shave your privates? Ask you for personal questions if you're dating anybody, if you're married, just uncomfortable stuff like that. But you just kind of push it aside. As women, we learn to deal with sexual harassment in different settings. Unfortunately, at work, it's a bit more difficult because you have to work with people and you have to kind of be part of the team and get along. So it was a bit of a juggling balance, but it was just very stressful time, along with the radio calls and learning the career as a new recruit and being a woman and the stresses of having to prove yourself every day. It was just like a lot of things were just adding up over time.
Yeah, like I can only imagine how stressful that would be. And I think I can draw parallels even just to our profession as well. Like, I mean, we are in it's kind of interesting because we're like the opposite. So we're in a female dominated career or profession, I should say. But what makes it different is that hierarchy. So, although we are in a female dominated profession, there's that difference between the hierarchy. And I think it's probably a parallel with you as well. So, as many as there are many female nurses, there are a lot of male physicians and male physicians who are in power.
Hmm.
I shouldn't say power over females because I shouldn't. That's not the way that I want it to represent it. But it's just we do see that hierarchical structure where there are those power imbalances, and it's really challenging. And in my own experience, I've kind of seen where female nurses might be around, let's say it was like a physician or like I'm thinking of a specific example where like I remember actually being in the OR, and it was a male surgeon and he was performing a C-section on a patient, and for whatever reason the patient had to have a general, and he was commenting on her body type and her shape and whatnot, and they were of course inappropriate comments. The patient is sedated and can't obviously comment. He started kind of making things like somewhat sexual types of comments about her body and her body type. And the nurses felt that it was like they kind of laughed and kind of chuckled it off. And I just had like a deadpan look and I was just like, no, like that's not cool. But the thing is, us being in those positions, we feel that we have to almost kind of play it out a little bit. And I can see that, if especially if you're new and you're in this profession and that you feel that, I need to I need to somehow tolerate this to do the job, or this is a part of the work when really it's not a part of the work. It still is sexual harassment.
Hmm. Or maybe you think that this is only happening to you, but in talking to other women, you realize that it's actually quite widespread and part of the culture.
And I think that when you're in an environment as a woman long enough, you'll realize quickly the tone and what the environment is like. For example, when I was new, even though I was new, I was still able to hear conversations of officers talking about other female officers, or the radio calls we had gone on, whether the person was attractive or unattractive, or like you said, comments about their physical appearance and stuff. So you hear those things, and it kind of makes you wonder what they're saying behind your back when you're not there.
Right, right.
Exactly.
Or if you're in a room full of officers, which I was often, the only one or one of two, at most three women on the shift. And that was like a full shift when there was three of us there. When you're like one of the very few women in the room and everybody's laughing and joking and carrying on about inappropriate stuff, and you can see your supervisor is sitting there and he's part of the whole joke, that kind of sets the tone, and it proves to you that this is an environment thing. It's not a one or two people thing. So it kind of makes you realize that you could only um, you could speak up, but you would be targeted for sure, because people will know that they feel like they can't trust you or they can't work with you. And it's a huge problem in policing. It's very
Did,
clicky.
did you ever hear anyone sort of say, "Hey guys, that's not appropriate"? Like, did anyone ever defend you or any other woman that they were talking about?
I've had a couple of officers when I was new stand up and get in front of things, but that was very few officers do that, because if you do that and people recognize that you're constantly protecting a certain person, if it's an opposite sex, people will say, oh, you're having some kind of relationship with them. Like, that would even create rumors too.
I see.
For example, like my coach officer, great guy, he was married, but for years people would joke about it in front of us behind our back that we were sleeping together, and it was a running joke. So those things, we had to be cautious about, because as women there's a lot of things that could hurt our careers, and that being one of them. It's a double standard.
Oh, absolutely. That's a full-on double standard. And I mean, like just kind of thinking back to your particular story without getting into like too much detail. I know that you've been on W5 and that you've spoken out about some of the things that have happened to you, but we know that like violence, not only sexual violence, is a huge issue in workplaces. It's also something that we see in healthcare. And like in policing, we're subject to both physical and sexual violence. So, can you think of some things that like our workplaces can do more to protect us? Because at this point, I'm kind of, it's scary, right? Like, and I think it's even more scary for you because, well, I shouldn't even say it's more scary for you. I think it's just scary for the general public because we are supposed to put our trust in policing, right? We're supposed to put, the statement on the cruisers is to serve and protect. But if within their own circle, their own sphere, they're not protecting those who are being affected by sexual violence or even workplace violence, it's quite concerning. So, can you maybe tell me a little bit about like how it was handled, if it was handled, if there were any resources available to you?
This is a great question, and there's different layers of how you answer this question. So there's like police officers who are Black, Indigenous, person of color. Then you got male, white police officers, and within their ranks, there is racism. I noticed that working in the same division for years, that most people that were getting opportunities were white officers and male officers, people that were
Right.
playing hockey, people that were getting along and, just part of the club. So that was one part of racism that I thought was really clear to me working there because, you know, it's all um, it's all relevant. You get promoted, you go up, you support officers. As a woman, you support other women, and that's how you make it a better place for everybody else, right? But for
Right,
women,
right.
when you're outnumbered and you are already dealing with so many different issues, and you go for help, and as a racialized woman myself, I noticed that my career was way behind than everybody else, other colleagues of mine that we had started at the same time together, or even colleagues that started after me. So that's one type of racism within the police service. When I spoke up and I brought my human rights complaint forward in 2018, I wasn't just complaining about sexual violence. I brought forward racism. I brought forward discrimination and bullying of officers
Mm.
of different race, not just myself. Like, there's so many people that are dealing with these issues at work and they're scared to come forward.
Mhm.
The other thing is the racism that the public are suffering or are faced. And it's the same officers that are abusing their colleagues and are being protected by the chiefs and the unions are now going in the public, going into the communities, and they're behaving the same way because they feel emboldened and that
Wow.
they're untouchable.
That's sort of ironic because we place our trust in police officers to serve and protect, as Amy said, and it sounds like that's not happening all of the time. I would like to think that most of the time that's not the case, but I think you've brought some really good points to light.
I work with a lot of good officers. There's good and bad in every career, as we all know.
Right. Yeah.
Certain careers, though, we can't afford to have bad people. For example, in healthcare, you can't afford to have
Yeah.
racism because it affects the masses. Same thing in policing. One bad police officer can destroy thousands of lives over the years.
Right.
These things, they carry on and they go up into the ranks. Then they promote these guys that behave this way, and then they protect the next guys that are behaving, and it's just a cycle that just continues. So I think that the people that need to be held accountable, and that's not what we're seeing here, is the management. There is
Right.
laws, there's policies, there's procedures, there's everything for this stuff, but nobody's following it. This is turning into nepotism and favoritism, and we're seeing it every day, and it's affecting so many lives. It's
Yeah,
very
like I mean,
frustrating. It's just very frustrating.
oh, I mean, I could only imagine, especially when you're in a situation with that type of hierarchical structure where, essentially like the shit rolls downhill, right? Like if the guys at the top are okay to do the bad things and maybe someone else has dirt on that person who's done bad things, it's this whole like silencing and saying, well, it's okay to kind of perpetuate this really negative behavior or this behavior where, hypersexualization of women within the workforce is okay because, I know that that superior has done it. He can't call me out and say that, you can't do this because he's done it. I have dirt on him. And it just creates this really, really negative cycle. But like, how do we break it? How do we change something like this? And this is where I think, having these stories and coming out is really, really important. But like, I mean, I think your experience, and maybe you can kind of talk to about the fact of when you actually did disclose, what did that look like?
When I filed my human rights complaint in 2018, it was September, and it was on it was on Toronto Star, I believe. So I had my colleagues calling me, messaging me. Some people were shocked. Just there was a lot of people just reaching out to me and expressing what they were going through and what was affecting them. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea. And I don't think anybody really does, because a lot of these things happen quietly. In the past, I've had female colleagues that just disappeared. So you don't really know what happens.
Right.
So
Right. Whoa.
when I filed my human rights complaint, it was matter of few days, within a week, nobody was messaging me anymore. It was as if everybody was told to stay away from me.
Yeah, you're like iced out.
Yeah, they completely isolated me. And I had a really good supervisor. He was so supportive and so kind. So one day he messaged me and said that my superintendent had ordered him not to talk to me anymore, and that I was
What?
That is so
to go,
wrong.
yeah, and he said that I was to go through my lawyer to speak to anybody at work. And this is 10 years of me going into work with these people. I went to some of their weddings. I went to, I spent time with these people. And so to have everybody abandon you when you're sick and down and at the worst moment of your life, that was even worse than what I went through initially. That betrayal hurt even more.
Hmm.
That makes you even sicker as a person, and it makes it so much hard to recover when you don't have support from people that you trusted and thought of as your family.
Yeah, like,
Very hard to face.
yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine what that would actually be like. Like, I think we've had, like, Sarah and I have had our situations within our workplaces where we felt isolated, but never to that extent where people fully socially isolated themselves or even ostracized us for coming out or saying something. Like, I think it's there is so much of that patriarchy and that so much misogyny that it's just kind of like puts you in such a difficult position. And I think one of the things that we did discuss earlier was, I think you had mentioned some of the numbers in terms of like retention and recruitment of female officers, and that there was a huge problem in terms of keeping them. Well, I mean, it makes sense. Like, if this is something that continues to happen,
Hmm.
I can't imagine how they'd be able to keep any female officers. And I think women in policing is very, very important. I'm sure you can probably detail to me why women in policing would be important. And it's really scary to hear that these type of things are happening in that type of environment. Especially, you touched on the racism part, and I definitely want to circle back to that. I knew that things were bad, but I didn't realize how bad that they were.
Yeah, and it's no
Yeah.
wonder that people aren't coming forward, because if this happened to you, let's say there was another female officer experiencing what you had, then it's not very reassuring to her that if she comes forward that anybody is going to support her. In fact, it sort of reinforces the fact that you would get iced out, you would be socially isolated, so you're dealing with a double whammy. So you've been off work for whatever reason, and you don't even have anyone at work that you can turn to anymore. It's just,
And that's
I don't know how.
precise.
I just feel, I mean, I have so much respect for you, Effie, that you have gone through this and you're still willing to come and talk to it and bring your experience forward.
Thank you so much. You're exactly right. But they do that on purpose. They want to make an example out of people so that anybody else who's watching would be very cautious of how they go about it. And this has been from the beginning. I mean, I had a supervisor who stood up for me years ago when I was a rookie, and I saw her career got destroyed right in front of my eyes.
Really?
People would,
Right.
yeah, people would talk so much nasty stuff about her. They would call her all kinds of names and call her a rat, and she was a supervisor. So as a new recruit, what I saw was, if I would ever dare to speak up, my career would end up like her. And
Yeah.
over the years, I saw what happened to her and, so many other women. So that's exactly why they do it, because they want to set the tone. They want to send a message. um, I've seen so many good female officers leave leave the job because of that. Women especially, we get into policing for a different reason. I didn't get into policing for, because I look good in uniform or I wanted to meet people. I got into policing because I truly love helping people. I truly love talking to people and being in the community. I came from a country where, it was war. When I was a kid, we were in bomb shelters and we were just running in panic all the time. So when I came here and, my parents brought us here for a better life, I truly wanted to give back to this community that has meant so much to me and my family. So that's why I became a cop. That's why I can't just walk away and, pretend like this isn't going to happen to the next generation. Or I have friends right now at work that are going through this stuff. So I think it's all of our responsibilities. And the first thing we need to do is speak up about it, because over the years, people have brought their issues forward, but it's always been buried, with non-disclosure agreements, or
Wow, yeah.
we've been hiding issues. So I think we need to bring it out and speak up and really and truly get to the bottom of this, because too many people are suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really, really worrisome to me. And it's kind of like, I kind of think to myself, like, is there anyone more dangerous than someone who has a gun and a badge who can say to you, you need to do this or else, right? Like, I think for me, I think that would be probably like one of the scariest things that could potentially ever happen to me. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through and are continuing to go through what you're going through. And I do know I've heard of some stories of some other people that we'll speak to at another time that have kind of gone through the process, but like you're kind of right in the throes, like right in the middle of it. And I think it's the public needs to know, the public needs to hear that these things are happening. And unfortunately, sometimes a few bad apples can ruin the entire, I guess, apple cart, so to speak, right? And I think if people want to, or if policing wants to have a better image, there's some internal things that they really need to look at and focus on and fix. And definitely that misogyny and that sexual harassment is one of them. Like, that is disgusting. It is absolutely abhorrent that this type of behavior is perpetuated and that people can get away with it. Like, it's absolutely unacceptable. And it's scary. I can't circle back to how scary it is. And I think this is where maybe it would be actually good to tie in some of the things that we're seeing now. And I don't want to really take away from the fact that this episode is primarily about your experience, but
No, no, it's all
like,
connected.
I don't want to diverge too far, but like, I know we've been seeing kind of some of the political unrest, and a lot of people say, well, that's the states. So that we saw, like, all these, I guess they call them domestic terror. I shouldn't say they call them, they are domestic terrorists that marched on the US Capitol. And I think some of the scary things and some of the scary imaging that we saw were police officers taking selfies. There was one video I saw where it was like the police was like inviting them to come in, like opening the barricades. It was like really bizarre. And I think my first question to you is, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I don't know if you saw the statement put out by Joe Biden, but essentially what he said was, he's like, no one could tell me that if it had been a group of Black Lives Matter protesting yesterday, that they wouldn't have been treated very differently than the mob of thugs that stormed the Capitol. And you kind of talked about that racism. And it's for me, it's super concerning as a racialized member of the community to say, I'm supposed to have my trust in these people when I don't feel that they might actually have my best interests at heart. And I'm not saying all of them, but the fact that of the matter, like you said, just as, like, for example, in healthcare, we can't have racism. And it's not to say that there isn't racism in healthcare, because definitely, oh my God, there is. And we've seen it in some of the cases where people have been literally sitting in their beds crying out for help and weren't getting the help and support. But again, in policing, that's another area where you're like, they have a gun and they have a badge and they have like a lot of power. And it's really, really, really scary to me.
Well, a couple of the things you said really stood out. One thing was, you're absolutely right. There's nobody more dangerous than a corrupt cop. And the reason for that is that police officers, we automatically come with trust. And when you come with trust, you have that extra responsibility, you have the extra duty to hold up the law above and beyond and carry your duties. So, as a police officer, if you're corrupt, automatically you can do whatever you want and nobody will know.
Hmm.
And likely people around you won't say anything because they're afraid to speak up. So, a corrupt police officer is, in my opinion, far more dangerous than anybody, any criminal. That's one thing. The other thing is what happened in the US. I was watching, and my question is, do we need to see this anymore? Do we need any more proof that there is systemic racism? Do we need any more people to die for us to really acknowledge? We know there is. It's happened, it's continuing to happen. And I feel like bringing it back to my own situation, we're screaming at people that are causing us harm and trying to tell them and show them that look what you're doing to us. We all know that if it was Black Lives Matters or any other community, marginalized community, or anybody else other than those people would have been shot on the step. They would have never made it up to the second step.
Oh, absolutely. I know without a shadow of a doubt. Like I was watching it as I was trying to do work, but I
Yeah.
couldn't. Like I was just like, "Oh my god, this is crazy." And I knew. I said to myself, "Okay, let's put three different demographics in there. Let's put an angry mob of black men. There would be so many shots fired, it would be unreal. A whole bunch of men, women in turbans. They would get it too. And I honestly believe Chinese Americans as well, it would be not a good situation for them either. Like I think if you are the other, you are not a white male, that the rules don't those rules apply differently for that subset. And it's horrible. I hate that the fact that I have to say it, but there are different rules for white men that are privileged than for everyone else. And we're seeing it in various different aspects, but like we see it in policing, we see it in healthcare, we see it in politics, we see it everywhere. And and I think this is where I plead with people. So for your situation in policing, I plead with people who are seeing these systemic abuses, who are seeing the sexual assault, who are seeing things that are untoward. We need to come together and say enough is enough. Like it's like we can't keep having these things happening. Like black people, racialized women, we're sick and tired of it. Like we're and it's exhausting to continue to explain. And I'm sure you Sarah and Effie, you can air my sentiments. It's just like we're tired of being killed. We're tired of being abused. We're tired of being treated differently because we're racialized, but we need allies and people who can see that it's happening to speak up and say, "Yeah, this is not okay."
And I think one of the things is if you are a bystander, you really need to say something. It can't just be one person trying to speak up for the other person. We need to have strength in numbers. So I'm just thinking, in your case, Effie, if one person stood up for you, maybe that wasn't enough. But if five or six people were to stand up for you, even in cases of bullying, we know that for every case of bullying, there's so many witnesses, but everyone is afraid to say something. But if we can just start saying something and being more proactive and doing it regularly, then that's what's going to make the difference. So I think for anyone listening, you need to stop being a bystander and you need to stand up for what is right. And I think like it's just we can only talk about it so much. We need to actually take action.
We absolutely have to take action, and we absolutely have to start calling these things that these injustices out. We have to start standing united with women, because this isn't going to go away. This isn't going to stop. This is going to just continue, and it's going to affect our kids and the next generation like it has, and it has affected us. I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews, and if my nieces ever wanted to be police officers, I would have a heart attack. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't let them because of what's happening. So this is why I have decided to continue fighting publicly, because I want to, along with other women, on Twitter and everywhere else, any chance I get, I like to, speak about this stuff and give my voice in any way I can to anybody else who's listening, who's doubting that, because it doesn't matter how much I suffered afterwards. I was suffering way worse before I was quiet.
Right,
And
absolutely.
anytime you're in a situation, especially, with certain careers or jobs where you have to work long hours, no matter how you put it aside or how you turn a blind eye, it will catch up to you, and it will affect you. It will affect your mental health. Then it affects your family and your friends. So it's very important that people stand together and they speak up and stop this, because it's only going to get worse. Um, for example, when I look at Toronto Police's union, it's all men. It's all white men. There is no room
Mm,
for anybody else. And we don't have equal representation. We don't have, when I was sexually assaulted, I couldn't go to my union. They were all men. How can you connect, right? When you're so
yeah.
outnumbered and you're seeing that the years and years of relationship that these people build with each other, they play golf together, they play hockey together, and then they go into unions. Of course they're not going to take my side, right? So that's the problem, is
Yeah.
that this nepotism has to stop. There is no boundary lines, there's no professional um, boundaries anymore within policing, and it has turned into some kind of high school social club. It's horrible, and it's like that. I have friends, women in other line of work, lawyers, Canada Post workers, and anybody I've talked to that's experienced a lot of bullying, harassment, sexual violence, is because of their union. They don't get any support from their union, and most of these unions are white men. That's facts.
Right.
Our chief of police, our association, chief of police associations, all white men. So when you're seeing this, and then you're seeing the other side of it, that you're not getting any kind of fair treatment, your colleagues aren't getting fair treatment, black male officers aren't getting fair treatment, it's not hard to see that what's happening here. We know what the problem is. How do we solve it? Because ultimately, we've been, as police women, we've been telling our chiefs, our police service board, we have a mayor who sits on the police board. And when myself and my colleagues went to file our human rights complaint, and our police unions knew about it, the police board knew about it, the mayor knew about it, and they ended up forcing my colleagues off the job with non-disclosure agreements.
Whoa.
Two amazing police women who cared about the public, cared about the communities, amazing women, are no longer police officers because they were sexually abused, because one of them had adopted a black child.
Wow.
And these are the things that people don't know. They don't realize this is happening in policing, because everything is so quiet. There is no transparency, there is no accountability, and it's been going on for generations, for decades.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the police are there to protect the public and to create, safe communities for people, and our job is to help. But if you're not helping, and if you're part of the problem, then you're just sucking up the budget, you're just wasting money. You're just and we're seeing this with policing. What's happening right now is people are fed up because they're not seeing the results that they need to see. For police that has such a big budget, there seems to be a lot of issues. So I completely agree with, maybe reforming it would be a little bit more palatable for people.
Yes, I think I've seen that where essentially I think like President sorry, I guess former President Obama was like, "Yeah, it's not so sexy to say that," but essentially what it is you're asking for police reform. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly.
Hey man, I'm all for taking some funds because nurses are friggin' hardworking and we are getting shafted when it comes to our pay. I don't know if it's because of gender equity. No, sorry, let's be honest. It is because it's gender inequity, pay inequity. Like we work really hard. Our jobs, I think one of the things that we did some research on is seeing that our jobs are almost as dangerous and as deadly as police officers in terms of the violence that we receive from patients. That's a whole other episode. We won't get into it today, but like our pay is completely different. Like I'm not knocking the fact that you guys have a very dangerous job as well and that police officers have a dangerous job, but it's just kind of like sometimes I look at it going, well, I think we could do things differently. And I think we need to look at how the funding is actually allocated.
I agree. And I think that we need to bring people from the outside, because it seems like, the policing world right now is so emotional about things that they don't want to hear what the public has to say. So maybe a buffer or somebody that could kind of that could come and sit down with and have a real plan, because right now there's a lot of push and pull, and that's not going to solve anything.
Oh, absolutely. Like I actually have a couple friends that are police officers, and whenever these types of conversations come up, it's like contention, and I'm just kind of like, in nursing, there's something called change management. We have to deal with change all of the time, and sometimes we have been doing something for 15 or 20 years, and that's just the way that we're used to doing it. But there's evidence that shows that there's a better way of doing it.
Hmm.
Sometimes you need to take that evidence, that scientific evidence, to say, okay, we need to do something differently and and actually do something about it, as opposed to being like, this is the way that we've done it for years and it works. Clearly it's not working and change is needed.
Absolutely. Policing is also similar to medicine, to nursing. Like you said, it's constantly changing. So, and these guys, they're like dinosaurs. They don't want to change. They want- it's true. They're so used to the old ways and the old this and that, but things are changing. Communities are changing. People are changing. We're constantly evolving. So, and so should the police, like everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, so we need to call out sexual violence in workplaces, full stop. There is no room for it in policing. There's no room for it in healthcare. There's no room for racism in policing. There's no room for racism in healthcare. Where do we go from here? So tell me a little bit about what your next steps are, maybe some takeaways in terms of like if another female colleague is experiencing this, what advice you might have for them.
So specifically with policing, the way to go about it, I think, I mean, I'm not an expert, but from what I'm seeing, the first thing we need to do is we need to collectively raise our voices. And one of the things that one of our biggest obstacles are the unions and the law. So because we have a union, anytime anybody has any issues, they have to go to the union. The problem is sexual assaults and anything to do with those types of crimes has to go to real court where there is no bias, there is transparency and accountability, but we're not getting that. So for me, I would like to change the law, or just change some parts of it so that we have access to court. Just because we're police women doesn't mean that we don't get raped, we don't get sexually assaulted. We have the same issues that every other person faces, but we have a union that is supposed to help us, which doesn't. So that's people that we're faced with. It's the law itself, and it's really hard to change. And the Supreme Court said recently with that they didn't want to open the floodgates with the Waterloo Kitchener class action lawsuit that they had launched. They were trying to get it certified, and they couldn't because the court said go back to your union. And so we have tried all the avenues, nothing works, and so we need to go back to the courts and say we need justice through the courts. That's what I think. That's where I'm headed to. That's where I'm hoping we'll end up in the Supreme Court, so we could change the law. The way to hold people or change a certain culture is by holding people accountable. Because unless something affects you personally, you're not going to change. And the problem with policing is that a lot of these officers are having their lawyers paid by taxpayers. So when you're not facing any consequences and you're not feeling any repercussions of your actions, then you're just going to continue doing what you're doing. So
Exactly. I think you can write all the policies you want, but if they're not held accountable in real life, then they mean nothing.
exactly. And we have so many of those policies, just like everybody else. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the management and how they want to go about and the tone they want to set. I think that this is going to take time. This type of stuff has been going on forever. So it's just a beginning, just speaking about it and standing up and fighting back. I don't know what's going to happen to my case, but whatever happens, I'm happy that I'm fighting for myself, and hopefully I'll be able to change some things for somebody else, or future police women, or just women in policing in general. And then that affects the public also. My recommendation is to be brave, to fight no matter what. The truth is on our side. And just like anything else, it takes time to go to courts, and all this stuff takes time. But the key is to never give up. The key is to never give up. I mean, I'm going through hell right now.
Yeah.
I'm fighting my lawyers, I'm fighting my police service. Um, my previous lawyer gave me a bill for $500,000 because I didn't want to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, yeah, so I'm dealing with all the time. What I would tell any woman coming forward is, you're going to get destroyed, but at least you're not going to be destroyed at work, At least you can look forward to making change. It's not going to be easy. Like, speaking up is not going to be easy anywhere in any work, especially in policing. But staying there and going through the stuff, and even just being in an environment where it's so toxic, it's not going to help you either. So I would suggest just speak up and throw it all in the air and see where the cards land.
Well, my last question to you is, what are you doing to keep yourself sane? This is not an easy situation. How do you keep yourself healthy at this point in time? For example, like if there are other people going through this, what what are some of the things that you're doing to try to keep yourself healthy and keep yourself going?
Um, some of the things I used to do before COVID was just hot yoga. I used to go to hot yoga all the time, and anything that would just give me that hour and a half of putting all my thoughts aside and clearing my mind was like the biggest savior every day at the beginning, when I had filed my human rights complaint. And as time went by, I started just listening to different motivational speakers and different women that were fighting injustices. And I just wanted to see what everybody else was doing. So every day I would tell myself why I'm fighting. I would give myself a little bit of strength every day. I would lift myself up, and I did a lot of that. I had bad days, I had good days. There was days where I was like, I wasn't suicidal, but I was, I thought about all the radio calls I used to go to where people had committed suicide. And um, I had a lot of dark days, but what got me through it was support. My family was so supportive, and it's so important for people who are going through things, that are dealing with mental health issues, or dealing with bullies or harassment, racism, sexual violence, is to have support. If you show support to anybody who's gone through anything, just like a plant that's dying, you give it water and love, they come back.
Mhm.
We're not broken. We
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
just, we're just hurting right now, and all we need is someone to listen to us and believe us. And for me specifically, I wanted them to investigate. That's all. Investigate and find out for yourself. And I didn't get that, unfortunately, but it's not over yet.
Mhm.
Yep.
So I'm so glad, Effie, that you had the support, because you mentioned that you were basically ostracized by your former police colleagues. Throughout your journey, has anyone reached out to you? Have you reached out to anyone? Like, have you met people along the way that experienced what you went through and sort of helped you along?
um, at the beginning, it was just my immediate family and a few of my colleagues.
Hmm.
But as time went on, when I went on Twitter, I was never on social media before. I mean, I was on Facebook, but not for long. I deactivated my account. So I started a Twitter account, and I thought, I'm just gonna go on there and stay anonymous and get some of my thoughts out there and see how it feels. I started tweeting, and I started meeting people, and I started meeting a lot of amazing women. And that's one of the best things that came out of this horrible time, is that the connections I've made with people. And I've met some amazing women that are going through the same thing, and I'm learning from their strength. We're pulling our resources together, so some good things has come out of it, which is why I always think that we have to give victims a voice. because that's how you come back. That's how you recover, by
Absolutely.
sharing and letting other people hear you. And even if somebody else takes a little bit of your experience and helps them in any way, that means so much to me as a I mean, I'm not an active police officer right now, but I don't want to feel like I am just, tossed aside. I'm useless. I want to contribute. I want to still feel like I'm contributing.
Yeah. No, your conversation is definitely contributing. And I think raising your voice as a racialized woman, as a woman who went through um, sexual violence, I think you're amazing.
Hmm.
Oh, you're sweet.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Effie,
much.
so much for coming on. If people want to find you on Twitter, or where can they look you up?
I'm on Twitter under Dirty Shades of Blue.
I love that
Um,
name, by the way.
Yeah.
Dirty Shades of Blue. I swear on there, but just so I, I'm very vocal on there, but I have a good heart, and I feel like as women we need to express ourselves and not give a heck or not give a s about what anybody.
You can swear. This is the Gritty Nurse podcast. Our podcast is explicit.
Yeah.
Okay, well, wonderful.
Place. I think I want to encourage other people who are listening. This is the one place where I think people need to feel that it's okay to be themselves. Like I think all day long, in our jobs, we are prim and we're proper and we're the nice person. And on the Gritty Nurse podcast, you can be your authentic self and you can say whatever the fuck you want.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Uh, So I'm just gonna say it once. I do swear a lot on Twitter, but I do say fuck a lot. But I think it's important we express ourselves. How we feel helps us heal in however way we can. So
And I feel like maybe that's why people have connected with you on Twitter, because you are your authentic self and you don't hold back, and that's very much what we need right now.
yes, we do need a lot of people to connect for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that my Twitter will help somebody else speak up and so on and so forth. And I'm so glad I met you, ladies. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come on here and speak.
Oh, thank you
Thank
for
you,
coming
Effie.
and speaking with us.
It's always amazing to talk to strong, amazing women.
Oh, thank you.